I'm now going to consider y double prime plus 3y prime plus 2y equal to sine t. And I'm going to start by assuming that y is equal to a sine t. In that case, y prime would be equal to a cosine t. And y double prime would be minus a sine t. So when I stick this into my differential equation, I have y double prime, or negative a sine t, plus 3 times y prime, which is a cosine t, plus 2 times y, which is a sine t, should be equal to sine t. Well, I can go ahead and combine things. In particular, here's a sine t and here's a sine t. So that would give me a sine t plus 3a cosine t is equal to sine t. And just like with polynomials, we need to look at coefficients. Here's a sine t term and a sine t term, so their coefficients need to match. That would tell me a equal to 1. I also have a cosine term on the left, and there's no cosine term on the right, so that would be a 0. That gives me 3a is equal to 0, or a is equal to 0. So once again, I have a is equal to 1 and a is equal to 0, which is impossible. So I did not pick a good value for y. So now I'm going to work the same example, but this time I'm going to let y be equal to a sine t plus b cosine t. Taking the derivative would give me a cosine t minus b sine t. And then my second derivative would be minus a sine t minus b cosine t. Sticking this in, I have y double prime, so minus a sine t minus b cosine t, plus 3 times y prime, so that would be 3 times a cosine t, minus 3 times b sine t, plus 2 times y, so 2a sine t, plus 2b cosine t. And this should all be equal to sine t. And once again, we look at coefficients. So here I have a sine, here's another sine term, a sine term, and a sine term. That tells me that I have the equation minus a minus 3b plus 2a equal to 1. In other words, a minus 3b is equal to 1. Next, I look at my cosine terms. I have 3 on the left and none on the right. That tells me that I have negative b plus 3a plus 2b equal to 0. In other words, 3a plus b equal to 0. If we try to solve this, I'm going to let the first equation stay the way it was. This one, I'm going to multiply by 3. So I have 9a plus 3b equal to 0. We can then add these up to get 10a is equal to 1, or a is equal to 1/10. This equation here then gives me 3 times a, which we just found, plus b to be equal to 0, or b is equal to minus 3/10. So I have my solution, which said y is equal to a times sine, so negative 10 times sine, plus b times cosine, so minus 3/10 cosine t.